once I started streaming, I had a son basically around the first year I started streaming. As I started to go through life, and I went from kind of being in this like working poor position to making a lot of money, especially through the lens of my child, I saw how different life was when I had more money versus less. And I guess like the differences between what was available to me and then my child as I made more money while I was really wealthy versus not as wealthy, it kind of started to change the way that I guess.
So you got more attuned to the consequences of inequality?
Basically, I would say, yeah.
Okay, and so how did that lead you to develop more sympathy for left-leaning ideas, particularly?
I guess my core beliefs have never really changed, but I think the way that those become applied kind of change. So much the same way that you might think that everybody deserves a shot to go to school and have an education. That might be like a core belief where as a libertarian or conservative, I might think that as long as a school is available, everybody's got the opportunity to go and study. But maybe now as like a liberal or progressive or whatever you'd call me, I might say, okay, well, we need to make sure that there's enough, maybe like food in the household or some kind of funding program to make sure the kid can actually go to school and study, basically. So like the core drive is the same, but I think the applied principle ends up changing a bit based on what you
right.
think
So is your concern essentially something like the observation that if people are bereft enough of substance, let's say, that it's difficult for them to take advantage of equal opportunities, even if they are presented to them, let's say?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
And you have some belief, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have some belief that there is room for state intervention at the level of basic provision to make those opportunities more manifest.
Yeah, to varying degrees, yeah.
Okay. So let's start talking more broadly then on the political side. So how would you characterize the difference, in your opinion, between the left and the conservative political viewpoints?
On a very, very, very broad level, if there's some like good world that we're all aiming for, I think people on the left seem to think that a collection of taxes from a large population that goes into a government that's able to precisely kind of dole out where that tax money goes. You're basically able to take the problems of society. You're able to scrape off, hopefully, not super significant amount of money from people that can afford to give a lot of money, and then through government programs and redistribution, you target those taxes essentially to people that kind of need whatever bare minimum to take advantage of opportunities in society. Yeah.
Okay.
And then on the conservative end, I guess a conservative would generally think that, why would the government take my money? I think from a community point of view, through churches, through community action, through families, we can better allocate our own dollars to our own friends and family to help them and give them the things that they need so that they can better participate in and thrive in society, basically.
Okay, so one of the things that I've always found a mystery, I think there's an equal mystery on the left and on the right in this regard, is that the more conservative types tend to be very skeptical of big government, and the leftist types tend to be more skeptical of big corporations. Right? Well, following through the logic that you just laid out, you made the suggestion that one of the things that characterizes people on the left is the belief that government can act as an agent of can and should act as an agent of distribution. Okay, a potential problem for that is the gigantism of the government that does that. Now, the conservatives are skeptical of that gigantism. And likewise, the liberals, the progressives in particular, we'll call them progressives, are skeptical of the reach of gigantic corporations. And I've always seen a commonality in those two, in that both of them are skeptical of gigantism. And so one of the things that I'm concerned about, generally speaking, with regard to the potential for the rise of tyranny is the emergence of giants. And one potential problem with the view that the government can and should act as an agent of redistribution is that there is an incentive put in place, two kinds of incentives. Number one, a major league incentive towards gigantism and tyranny. And number two, an incentive for psychopaths who use compassion to justify their grip on power, to take money and to claim that they're doing good. And I see that happening everywhere now particularly in the name of compassion. And it's one of the things that's made me very skeptical, in particular about the left, and at least about the progressive edge of the left. So I'm curious about what you think about.
Yeah, we've been going for a while. This seems like as good a time as any to pause and talk about it. There were several people in the chat who were joking about how this really seemed like a therapy intake session, and definitely the body language and the sort of pattern of who's talking most, all that definitely does have that feel to it, I have to say. But they are finally, I think, getting a little bit into something real. So I do have some stuff to say about this, but you guys have any thoughts?
So it seems like the first sort of substantive political argument that Jordan Peterson made is that if you let the government get bigger, one is he says there's, leftists are skeptical of corporations and right-wingers are skeptical of governments. And I don't think that's exactly right as a distinction between left and right. Because I mean, of course, if you look at libertarian leftists, libertarian socialists, they're going to be skeptical of both big government and big corporations. And to the extent that they support things like welfare, you'll hear Chomsky talk about this. It's basically okay, the government is an evil, but it's one that in our current circumstance, we can sort of use to keep corporations in check to some extent. But ultimately, we don't want big government either. But also, he makes this point about how if you have more government interference in the economy, etc., you're going to get more corruption, basically, seems to be his concern. And he can think of some sort of mechanistic reasons why we would expect that. And I mean, it's worth noting that you can think of sort of obvious mechanisms why having a bigger government could lead to more corruption. There are also sort of plausible mechanisms on the other side. One that I've heard mentioned is if more people's money is being held by the government, redistributed by the government, people are going to have more of an incentive to pay attention to the government and what the government is doing, because it's hey, that's my money, so I'm going to be more diligent in monitoring how the government is using my money. And then as just an empirical question, I mean, the research that I've done on this, because I remember looking up a lot of stuff about this a while back, and it seems to be the case that at least among democracies, bigger governments in terms of how much of the economy they control, etc., having a bigger government actually tends to be correlated with having a less corrupt government, although that association breaks down for non-democracies.
Right.
Yeah, I don't have that many thoughts beyond what Ethan just said, but I mean, I think obviously most of what we've seen was kind of an interview, right? It wasn't really a debate yet. It was Jordan Peterson just asking him questions, and then Destiny started talking about his background and where he's coming from. But yeah, I mean, I think as this develops, I think we'll get to see, because I full disclosure, I did watch, I think I had this on in the background last week, I think, when it first came out, so I've kind of watched it, but not really. And all I can say is it's I think it's going to get a lot worse than this in terms of kind of Peterson's. I mean, I always just start cringing as soon as Peterson starts talking about politics, because I just feel like his understanding of the way that he divides the world is I mean, it's just clear, but he talks with the same authority as if he's talking about psychology. It's that's just such a problem.
Yeah, and he mixes them together. We got he very calmly and confidently said a few minutes ago that science tells us that left-wing beliefs are very girly, whereas right-wing beliefs are very manly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's essentially what you said. It's oh wow, that's science. Science tells you that. All right. But to me, where it actually got a little bit interesting was when it was still very interviewee, or again very therapy intakey. That when Destiny starts to describe his political evolution. I mean, like, okay, my first thought was when he said he used to be a neocon. It's like, wow, man, really back to your roots the last few months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, then he said something that, definitely made me think much more positive thoughts about him, which was that, having a child at the same time that he was making more money, and thinking about the difference, that made to his life and the different opportunities that his child would have compared to him, made him, I mean, they're using the word left here in a way that I don't love, but whatever, right? Just to like adopt that, right? Like made him move to the left from where he was. It's like, okay, that's actually kind of, that's good. But then like when he starts to like really explain it, it really seems like his whole justification for redistribution is some kind of pretty shallow equality of opportunity principle that like, okay, it's not just good enough. This was his example to make sure that everybody can go to school. You also need to make sure they're like, getting enough food at home and all that stuff to, to make sure that they can fully take advantage of that opportunity. It's like, yeah, fair enough. Obviously no argument with any of that, but like, but it still seems to assume that inequality is only bad to the extent that it's linked to this like pretty narrow notion of equality of opportunity, right? Like everybody has a shot of going through the education system and climbing some career ladder and, and having like a good life from like a middle-class profession, which seems to me like, I mean, I guess there are different ways you could push this, but it seems to me like a really narrow and unsatisfying notion of equality. And one way to think about it, right, because this is a discussion, how debatey it gets, I suppose, remains to be seen with Jordan Peterson, is that...
Oh, it's going to get contentious, don't worry.
Okay, good. So is that like Peterson is like much worse on this than Destiny is. But there's like a spectrum, and I think Destiny's position isn't really as far away from Peterson's as I would ultimately like. So Peterson's classic thing, you can go back, and this is something that's always bugged me, like when I started, I mean, in some ways kind of what led to everything else I'm doing is that back in 2018, I spent way too much time like arguing with friends and relatives about Jordan Peterson. And that kind of morphed into, all the public facing stuff. And, the first like video on YouTube of me is of this like talk that I gave in 2018 at a conference that's about Jordan Peterson. One of the points I'm making here is that it's like Peterson's always saying, it's like one of his big like core things. Oh, equality of opportunity, that's great, it's noble, but quality of outcome, that's bad, right? That leads straight to the gulag. But it seems like there are many objections you could make to that, but one of the most obvious objections is, which to be fair, I do think Destiny has kind of gotten this far, is, well, hold on, but are those two things really unrelated to each other, right? Like, don't one generation's outcomes become the next generation's opportunities? But then the problem is, it's like, look, ultimately, what kind of society do you want, right? I mean, is it just like, are you sort of satisfied if everybody has whatever you would consider to be a reasonable shot to go to college and get a middle-class job? Because I'm not. I mean, that's a pretty dismal vision, because like, by definition, that's just not going to help most people. Like, the only reason that having a college degree gives you an advantage on the labor market is because most people don't have them, right? Like if everybody had them, then there'd be no advantage, right? You wouldn't get anything out of that. This is the whole thing is, this is like having, rare skills or credentials helps you because other people don't have them. And it's like, well, hold on. I mean, the ability, even if we did somehow achieve total equality of opportunity in that sense, the ability to do well in school or have the like particular cocktail of personality traits and skills and dispositions that like helps you move up some professional class career ladder. I mean, those things aren't evenly distributed in the population. Not everybody is born with as much of those as everybody else, right? You could obviously work on it like you can with any other skill, but like, you know, what you have to work with isn't evenly distributed. So like, if you're not good at school, is it just okay that therefore you have like a much worse life than people who are good at school? And this is not even get into like inherited wealth or anything like that. Like this just seems like a really, like, to me, this seems like an incredibly shallow way to think about equality, but one that's like pretty typical for like mainstream American liberals.
Yeah, there's no question that I think Destiny is like a welfare state liberal or something like that. That's as far as it goes. Like, I think, you know, he might even be at his most left. He's probably like, you know, social democrat, like would like more aspects of like Nordic countries to be implemented in, you know, in America or something. But I think it depends on case by case basis there. But yeah, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. It's interesting. You made me think about something I often talk about, you know, to my students in, you know, in the context, you know, here in Canada. I think when I was explaining G.A. Cohen's Why Not Socialism a few weeks ago, and I was talking about the different types of equality of opportunity. And I don't know, we were just talking about different examples, and I always like to use the example of the way that American public schools are funded, because that's so crazy. It's like, you know, it's like such a good example of something where you're just so screwed by geographic circumstances. Because like here, I'm right now, I'm in British Columbia in Vancouver, but like where I'm normally, I'm in Ontario, and I think it's probably the same across Canada, where like public schools, like it's not just purely your like local neighborhood, right? The taxes, and it probably varies by state, right? I'm guessing that maybe some states have more. But that's like a good example, I think, of something that I always like to talk to, because when I explain it to at least Canadian students, they're always shocked. They're like, "What?" They're like, "The schools are radically different, like depending on the neighborhood." And they're like, "I'm like, yeah, in some states."
Yeah, I think in general, I actually don't know of any states in the U.S. where that's not the case. But I'm not, you know, not an expert. I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm not familiar with, you know, with any counterexamples to that. But
yeah, neither am I.
But yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, in Cohen's like division and Why Not Socialism, right? I mean, he says, like, yeah, so that's right. Bourgeois equality of opportunity is just, you're not, there are no obstacles to your advancement that are like legally set. Like if you're, you know, which depending on like which like estate you were born into in France before the revolution or something. That, you know, that if, you know, there's no mechanism for a peasant to become a noble. You know, so as long as you don't have that, you have equality of opportunity. But then, yeah, the middle level, which I think is roughly where Destiny is what he calls left liberal equality of opportunity, which is like, yeah, if we have stuff like school funding depends on, you know, like the tax base in your neighborhood, then that's, you know, that violates that sense of equality of opportunity. But I mean, I think kind of the stuff I was trying to point to earlier is the sort of thing that Cohen has in mind, where he says, no, we should really like, at least as our North Star, even if how close social institutions can realistically get to it is going to vary over time. We should have something, this, what he calls socialist equality of opportunity, so that, you know, you just don't have inequalities that are outside of anybody's control. I mean, right. This is like a couple of years ago, just over 2 years ago, right, when I was on, you know, Joe Rogan, and there's this very funny clip where he asked me if I'm a straight up socialist. Are you like a democratic socialist or like a straight up socialist? You know, and I like tried to explain to him what I believed. I mean, I wasn't going to go into G.A. Cohen and all that and Joe Rogan, but like I sort of tried to gesture at something like that. I was like, look, if there are people who one person has more than another because they just like choose to work more, then okay, I'm not necessarily bothered by that. But, you know, but if there's inequality that's outside of their control, then yeah, that seems pretty bad. So yeah, that's Destiny. And then Jordan Peterson, in what we've got just now, has I mean, okay, so I've got two superficial comments about this and then one substantive one, and I'm done. So two superficial comments are, one, as we've been watching, I keep staring at Peterson's jacket and trying to figure out what that like design is. I can't quite tell. I don't know if you guys could tell. But
yeah, he always loves those patterns. Those
and like in
gaudy
suit jackets, that just feels very Riddler-ish to me. But
he's trying to become a supervillain.
Yeah. The other superficial comment is that beyond weird word choice, he keeps saying the word gigantism in a weird way. Like I can't even remember it exactly now as I'm trying to think, but he's definitely saying it oddly, right? Like the pronunciation is very odd. But putting that aside, right, the gigantism concern, I think Ethan was saying some of this earlier, but it's like, is that really what people are objecting to? Right? Is the gigantism? I mean, like, look, this is not a stunningly original point, but like, I don't know. I mean, if conservatives typically want to impose more government regulation on like what happens in a womb, right? That seems like a pretty big government, right? And I'm also like, I'm even less convinced by the idea that the sort of main thing that the left, at least if he's using the word the left in a way I recognize, is concerned with is like corporate gigantism. Is that really the issue, that the companies are too big? Right. I mean, it's like there are definitely kinds of corporate power that are made worse by, there being fewer corporations and, more monopoly power or whatever. But like, it seems like if we're talking about the left, that's not really the issue. I mean, like, if anything, like it seems like, there's a lot of like some of the things the left dislikes the most about private business are actually even worse for smaller ones. That low wages, aggressive union busting, less autonomy, on the job if your boss is like right there with you all the time. And even I was thinking about stuff like arguments about the minimum wage, right? That's sort of one of the main conservative arguments against minimum wage hikes is smaller businesses will, end up going out of business because they can't afford it. And, I think we can argue about the extent to which that's true, but like also, to the extent that the concern is about like unemployment, then sure, leftists will take that seriously. But I would argue is a good reason to have like federal jobs programs and stuff, not a good reason to pay people poverty wages. But to the extent that it's just that bigger companies will like gobble up smaller ones because like smaller ones won't be able to afford to pay the higher wages. I mean, I don't know. I think a lot of leftists, at least if we're talking about like people who have positions that are like, well, the left of destiny, would just kind of be like, yeah, okay. Right. Like, I don't, I'm not that bothered by that necessarily. Right. Like I don't, and like certainly in a case like, without even getting into like thinking about full socialism or anything. I mean, like even just thinking about basic social democratic stuff, it's like, look, my objection to Blue Cross Blue Shield and Aetna is not that they're too big, right? Like I want a universal Medicare program that would be even bigger. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.